She was building her cabin, one log at a time. Unaware the cowboy watching was a widower longing for a family. Montana Territory, late afternoon, in early November, 1881. Snow clung to the branches of pine and spruce, blanketing the clearing in a hush only the wilderness could know. The skeleton of a small cabin stood half-finished, its log walls rough but steady. Wind whispered through the gaps in the wood, carrying the scent of pine sap and winter's approach. "Miss, I thought this place was abandoned, but clearly I was wrong." The voice came from the tree line, low and calm, with the faint drawl of a man who had spent years with horses and silence. Eleanor Sullivan straightened slowly, one hand braced against her lower back, the other gripping the handle of her hammer. She turned to find a man on horseback watching her from just beyond the clearing, his bay gelding pawing at the frosted ground. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. She had not seen another soul in over a week, not since the Kowalskis brought her a sack of flour and a warning about early snow. Her eyes narrowed. "This land is mine. If you're lost, head back west. There's nothing for you here." The man tipped his hat. "I mean no trouble, ma'am. Just riding the boundary line of my family's ranch. Name's Clayton Hartwell. Circle H, 10 miles north." He paused, eyes flicking from the half-built cabin to the worn gloves on her hands. "Didn't expect to find someone. Building alone." Eleanor's gaze didn't soften. "I prefer it that way." Clayton dismounted with practiced ease. He led the horse a few steps closer but kept a respectful distance, boots crunching lightly over frozen grass. "No offense meant, just most women don't do this kind of work." He glanced at the wall frame, then at her belly. "Especially not in your condition." "I didn't come here to fit most women." Eleanor lifted the hammer again, struck a nail with sure, even force. Her breath steamed in the cold air. "I came here to start over." Clayton watched her a moment longer, then stepped back, raising both hands slightly as if to show he held no threat. "Fair enough. Just thought you might need help with something heavy. Carrying a child and a cabin at the same time, that takes grit." "I've got grit. What I don't have is time for charity." She turned, lifting another log plank into place. Her movement was slower now, heavier with the child growing beneath her ribs. But she didn't waver. "So if you're offering pity, take it back to Circle A." Clayton studied her. There was defiance in her posture, yes, but something else too. Weariness hidden behind pride. He didn't see a woman breaking. He saw a woman holding everything together with nothing but will. "Not pity," he said finally, "just respect." Eleanor didn't respond at first. She hammered in silence until the plank held fast. Then she looked at him, truly looked. The man had the bearing of someone raised with comfort, but there were lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of loss. His clothes were clean, but his hands were calloused. And there was something in his expression, a flicker of something she hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. "I've had enough of people who want to fix things," she said, her voice softer now. "I'm not broken, just building." Clayton nodded, understood. He mounted his horse again, but before turning back to the aspens, he hesitated. "If you change your mind, ma'am, if you ever need anything, the Circle H ain't far." Eleanor didn't answer. She watched as he rode off, disappearing between the trees. Only when he was gone did she lean against the half-built wall and exhale. The child inside her stirred, a soft flutter low in her belly. She pressed a hand to it, eyes still on the place where he'd vanished. "That's not the kind of man who passes through by accident," she murmured. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, her heart had stirred too. Not with fear, with something that frightened her more. Hope. 3 days later. The morning sun hung low, casting long shadows across the frozen prairie. Eleanor stood at the base of her half-finished cabin, a plank of rough-hewn pine balanced awkwardly against her shoulder. Her lower back throbbed with every breath, her fingers stiff from cold and labor. The baby had shifted lower in the past week, bringing with it a new heaviness that made each task feel like a mountain. Still, she worked. She had to. She had driven the foundation stakes herself, hauled each log from the woods with only a borrowed cart and grit. Her food stores were packed tight in the root cellar, and her chimney now pulled cleanly with smoke. But the walls weren't done, and the snow whispered of coming harder days. She set the plank down with a grunt, breath catching as a sharp ache lanced across her side. "You're pushing too hard." The voice, deep, familiar, startled her. She spun, heart leaping, only to find Clayton Hartwell standing beside his bay gelding at the edge of the clearing. He held a bundle in his arms, wrapped in a checkered cloth. He looked less formal today. No vest, no gloves, just a wool coat, and eyes that saw too much. Eleanor tightened her grip on the hammer. "I didn't ask for company." "No," he said gently, "but I figured I'd come anyway." He took a slow step forward and placed the bundle atop a stump. "My mother sent this. Tea for nausea. And some baby clothes she knitted. Said you'd probably pretend not to need them, but send them anyway." She would. Eleanor stared at the bundle, not moving. Clayton glanced at her cabin walls. "Coming along. You've done all this yourself?" She gave a curt nod. "Every nail." "Impressive." He looked at her belly, then at her hands. "Painful, too, I imagine." Eleanor folded her arms, bracing herself against the cold and something warmer she didn't want to feel. "Why are you really here, Mr. Hartwell? Slumming? Or just gathering stories to tell your mother?" Clayton's gaze didn't flinch. "I came because I wanted to. And because I don't like the thought of you working through the pain, alone, when it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not a charity case. I never said you were." She stepped forward, voice tight. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Men like you offer help like it's some kind of blessing, but it always comes with a price, expectations, judgments." He didn't speak at first, just let her words hang there in the morning frost. Then, softly, "Some people offer help not because they think you're weak, but because they admire your strength." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. Clayton continued, quieter now. "I've seen a lot of people fold under less than what you're carrying. But here you are, building something real, alone, with no one watching, no one clapping. That's not weakness. That's rare." She swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "I won't stay," he added, gesturing to the bundle. "Just thought you could use the tea. And maybe a reminder that not everyone who shows up is looking to fix or claim you." Eleanor looked at the bundle, then at him. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any flirtation could have. He meant it. "You can leave it there," she said finally. He nodded once, turned and walked back toward his horse. She watched him go, her pulse louder than the wind. When he vanished into the trees, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She moved to the stump and opened the cloth. Inside were 3 tiny knit garments, soft yellow wool, stitched with care, and a tin of tea leaves that smelled faintly of ginger and mint. For the first time since she'd arrived in Montana, something in her chest cracked, not enough to fall apart, just enough to feel. 1 week later, the wind had picked up again, slipping through the cracks in the unfinished cabin walls, rattling loose nails like bones in a sack. Eleanor sat beside the hearth, if it could be called that yet, where stones marked the future outline of a fireplace. Her hands were red from handling lumber, her breath clouding in front of her face. Clayton knelt across from her, setting another log near the growing stack. They had worked all morning, side by side. No declarations, no unnecessary words. Just the rhythm of hammers and the occasional breathless laugh when a board refused to fit and splintered in protest. He handed her the canteen. She took it without hesitation now. "You work like a man twice your size," he said, wiping sawdust from his sleeves. "I had to," she replied, staring into the wind-dancing embers of a fire barely holding on. "I didn't have the luxury of waiting for someone else to save me." He sat beside her, pulling his coat tighter. She did not look at him when she spoke next. "I was married, in Boston. Proper ceremony. Ivory gloves, roses, the whole show. He walked out 6 months later, said the child wasn't his." Clayton turned his head slowly, his eyes unreadable. "I never told him the truth," Eleanor continued, "that the child was his, that the dates lined up. Didn't see the point. He left before I could even say the words." Silence pressed between them. She exhaled. The divorce papers. They were never filed, not fully. Legally, I'm still his wife. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's a hell of a weight to carry. Eleanor let her gaze fall to the boards beneath them. It's not something I lead with. Out here, people already look at me like I'm damaged goods. Adding legally married doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Clayton gave a quiet nod. People are quick to judge what they don't understand. She glanced sideways. You haven't asked if I still love him. No, he said softly. I figure if you did, you wouldn't be here. She blinked, once, then twice. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. What about you? She asked, voice barely above the wind. You don't strike me as the type who rides alone just for the peace and quiet. He looked toward the snowy hills. Her name was Sarah. My wife. We married young. Too young, maybe. She liked to race horses. Took a gelding too fast one morning and broke her neck on the ridge east of our ranch. Eleanor's heart stilled. I found her myself. I was 28. That was 5 winters ago. Since then, I ride, I mend fences, I keep to myself. Not because I'm afraid to love again. Just didn't see the point. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. So am I, he said. But I'm still here. And so are you. The wind howled outside, snow spiraling in bursts across the cabin's open doorway. They worked a few hours more. He chiseled boards for the roof frame while she measured lengths for the door. Their movements found a kind of harmony neither of them commented on, as if speaking it would break the spell. When the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long violet shadows across the valley, they sat again, this time on the half-finished porch. Eleanor wrapped her shawl around her belly, her gloved hands trembling slightly from exertion. Clayton offered his coat. She refused it. But after a beat, she said quietly, It feels safer to do everything alone. But maybe it's just lonelier. Clayton looked at her, not with pity, not with possession, just something steadier, warmer. Maybe, he said. And the wind for once passed softly through the timber walls, as if deciding for that moment not to push them apart. Late autumn, wind curling through the valley, bringing whispers with it. By the time the first frost glazed the tall grasses around Eleanor's cabin, the wind carried more than just cold. It carried voices, fragments of rumors, laced with curiosity and judgment, drifting into town with every passing wagon. They talked about a woman alone in the wilderness, too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to fit into society's mold. But more than that, they talked about the visits, about Clayton Hartwell, about a respected rancher's son, seen too often riding south, staying too long near a half-built home, and a woman who wore her shame like armor. Eleanor had heard whispers at the general store in Willowbrook when she traded eggs for flour. The clerk's polite smile was tight-lipped now. The Kowalskis, kind as they'd been, had grown cautious, their questions more clipped. She pretended not to notice. Until one cold morning, with the ground hard beneath her boots and the air sharp with pine and secrets, a carriage she did not recognize rolled into her clearing. The woman who stepped out moved like someone raised to rule a room. Her coat was imported wool, her gloves lambskin, her hair pinned in an elaborate twist that spoke of servants and salons. Miss Sullivan, the woman said crisply, adjusting her skirt as she surveyed the modest porch. I am Victoria Morrison. I imagine my name has reached you, if not formally. Eleanor did not speak at first. She straightened, placing her hand instinctively over her swelling belly. I know of you, she replied, voice calm. Victoria's gaze swept over the cabin, the sawdust, the unpainted walls. Then it settled on Eleanor. Then I will be brief. This arrangement, whatever it is between you and Mr. Hartwell, needs to end. Eleanor lifted her chin. There is no arrangement. Then end the association. He visits often. People talk. His family name is being dragged through every parlor in Willowbrook and beyond. I never asked him to come. But you never sent him away either, did you? Victoria's smile was tight, brittle. You let him stay. You let him help. And now my fiancé is hesitating to set a wedding date, while the town wonders if he's fathering another man's child. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her voice held steady. He's a free man, Miss Morrison. I have not seduced him, nor do I seek his name or fortune. No, just his attention, his time, his reputation. Victoria stepped forward. You think I am heartless, that I do not understand hardship. But I do. What I do not accept is allowing a scandal to blossom in plain sight while good men lose their standing because of misplaced chivalry. Eleanor felt her nails dig into her palms. I built this cabin alone, she said. Split my own firewood. Sewed clothes for a child who will never know the comfort of legitimacy. I've asked nothing of your fiancé but kindness. I've kept to myself. Not enough, Victoria snapped, because your presence still haunts him, and your silence lets the world imagine the worst. She drew a breath, cold mist curling from her lips. Leave. Sell the land, go east, or vanish into some other town that will take a woman with your situation. But do not stay here. Not where he can see you. Not where his future is being whittled down, one scandalous story at a time. Eleanor felt the heat rise in her face. You do not own him. But I know how this world works, Victoria said. Men fall in love with ideas. Romantic fictions about strength wrapped in suffering. But they marry respectability. They marry the path of least resistance. She stepped back. Make it easier on him, on all of us, before this ends worse. When the carriage wheels vanished into the forest and the silence returned, Eleanor stood unmoving. The cold bit through her shawl. Her breath came ragged. Later she would sweep the porch, restack the logs Clayton had chopped last week. She would boil tea and feel the baby kick beneath her ribs. But for now, she stood on that porch, her body aching and her heart heavier than any lumber beam she'd lifted. She looked out into the wild that had become her only refuge. Then she whispered to no one, Am I destroying the only good man who ever looked at me without pity? Early winter. Snowfall steady, the earth hushed beneath a quilt of white. The storm came quietly but steady. Snow clung to the trees like lacework, and the chimney smoke curled in silence above Eleanor's cabin. She sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea that had long since gone cold. It had been days since Victoria Morrison's visit, days since those sharp words had carved through her defenses and left behind something far more dangerous than fear. Doubt. Each time the wind whistled through the trees, she braced for another confrontation. For Clayton to arrive with anger in his voice or disappointment in his eyes. But when he did come, he brought neither. The hoofs reached her ears before the knock did, deliberate, familiar. She opened the door before he could raise his hand to knock. Snowflakes scattered off his shoulders and the brim of his hat. His coat was dusted in white, his cheeks red from cold and conviction. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and calm, I need to talk to you. She stepped aside. You should not be here. I should be exactly here, he answered, stepping inside. The fire flickered against his features as he removed his gloves. His movements were different now. No hesitation, no polite uncertainty, just resolve. She stood near the hearth, arms folded over her belly, as if trying to shield both herself and the life inside from what was coming. I went home, he began, and told my father the engagement's off. I told him I would not marry Victoria Morrison, that I would not be shamed into building a life I do not believe in. Eleanor's breath caught. He was furious, Clayton said simply, threatened to cut me off, called me a fool, but I did not back down. Clayton, she began, but he raised a hand. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because you need to understand. This is not about pity, or rebellion, or some romantic fancy. He stepped closer, his voice gentling. This is about choosing what is real. You, this place, that child. I've seen more truth in the way you hold a hammer than I have in every ballroom conversation of my life. Eleanor blinked, her throat tightening. You cannot throw your future away on a scandal, she whispered. I'm not throwing anything away, he replied. I'm building something new. A long silence filled the space between them. Only the fire cracked softly in the hearth. Eleanor turned her face to the flames. Her hands trembled. "There is something you don't know," she said, her voice barely above breath. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." Clayton waited. His silence was steady, unflinching. "I am not divorced," she said. "Legally, I am still married. To Charles Whitmore, the man who left me the moment I told him I was expecting." Clayton's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. "I thought it was over. I left Boston with papers unsigned, believing he would file them, but no document ever arrived, no final decree. And I didn't have the strength to chase it down. I just wanted to disappear." She turned toward him now, eyes shining with guilt and something that looked like shame. "I am not a widow. I am not free. I am someone else's wife, at least in the eyes of the law. And you deserve to know that before you throw your life into ruin for someone who cannot give you anything in return." The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and glinting. Clayton stepped forward until he stood directly before her. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and took her hands, rough, calloused hands that had built a home from nothing. "You think this changes how I feel?" he said softly. She tried to pull back, but he held fast, gentle and firm. "It only makes me want to fight harder for you." Her breath hitched. "I have seen what you've endured. I know the cost you've paid. And I see you still choosing to stand, still choosing to build. That does not make you a burden. That makes you braver than anyone I know." "I can't offer you anything," she whispered. "Not a name, not a proper future. Just this. Snow and silence, and a child that's not even born yet." "You offered me the truth," Clayton said. "You offered me something real. That's more than I ever had with anyone else." She looked up at him now, truly looked, and what she saw was not pity, not charity. It was love. The fire crackled behind them as the wind sighed against the cabin walls, and for the first time since the world had turned against her, Eleanor felt the weight in her chest begin to shift. Not gone, but shared. Clayton's hand never left hers, and neither did his promise. Deep winter, wind stirring the pines, moonlight silvering the snow-covered clearing. The cabin stood like a defiant heartbeat in the wilderness, framed by bare trees and the distant hush of wolves. Inside, Eleanor Sullivan sat at her work table, her hands wrapped around the carved cradle's rail, heart pounding with something she could not name. Not fear, not joy, something in between, a breath held too long. Clayton stood near the hearth, his shadow stretching toward her like an unspoken promise. "You should not have come back," she said quietly. He didn't move. "You knew I would." Eleanor's eyes met his for only a moment before returning to the floor. "It doesn't matter what we feel. You know that, Clayton. We can't rewrite the law or erase judgment." "I'm not trying to rewrite anything," he answered. "I'm just trying to write something that finally feels true." She stood, abruptly, her hands pressing to the small of her back as her belly shifted. The child inside kicked hard, as if sensing the storm beneath her skin. "You think love will make this easier?" she snapped. "It doesn't. Love doesn't silence gossip. It doesn't file divorce papers. It doesn't buy land or raise a child or shield us from a town waiting for me to fall apart." "I don't care about the town," Clayton said. "You should," she flared, voice shaking, "because it will care about you. About the son of Circle H choosing a married woman with a bastard child and a scandal for a past." Clayton's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "He's not a bastard. He's yours, and that makes him better than most men I've known." Eleanor felt the breath rush from her lungs. She turned away, one hand trembling as it braced against the window frame. "I've spent every night for months wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone," she whispered. "And now that someone offers to carry some of that weight, all I feel is fear." Clayton crossed the floor in silence until he stood behind her, just close enough for his warmth to reach her through the space. "Why fear?" he asked. "Because I've loved before," she answered, barely audible. "And I was wrong. Because I believed words that turned to ash in my mouth. Because I trusted a man to stay, and he left without even asking if the child was his. Clayton's voice was low. "And now you think I'll do the same?" She didn't answer. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said, "I know what it is to lose someone, to have the ground ripped out from under your feet. My wife, she died on a morning that started like any other. One minute she was laughing about my coffee being too strong. The next her horse bolted, and she never opened her eyes again." She turned slowly, her face stricken. "I buried her under a cottonwood tree," he said, "and every day since, I've lived like the world owed me nothing. I stopped believing in fate, in joy, in any of it." He cupped her face then, gentle, reverent, "until I rode into your clearing and saw you driving a nail like it owed you rent." A single startled laugh broke from her throat, half sob, half disbelief. "You're not some lost woman I stumbled across," he continued. "You're the fire I didn't know I needed, and I don't want to lose that. Not because of laws I didn't write, not because of people too cowardly to build something for themselves." Eleanor's hands came up, touching his wrists, but not pushing him away. "I don't know how to let you in," she said softly. "I've built so many walls, I forgot where the door is." He leaned his forehead to hers, voice breaking. "Then, let me help you find it." For a moment, the world narrowed to just them. Snow outside, warmth within, and a fragile thread of hope pulling tight. "I lost my wife before," Clayton whispered, his voice full of memory and new resolve. "I won't lose you too. Not when I finally found something worth keeping." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. The sky turned the color of lead by late afternoon. Eleanor gripped the porch railing as a biting wind stirred the pines into nervous whispers. The baby had been restless all morning, kicking low and sharp, as if it too sensed what was coming. Snow fell heavy, thick, and fast. Within an hour the world disappeared in white. Eleanor lit every lamp, laid out towels, boiled water, her pulse wild with dread. Then it hit. A contraction like fire, stealing her breath, doubling her over. She clutched the table, eyes wide with pain. "Not now," she whispered. "Not like this." She was alone. Miles away, Clayton Hartwell saddled his best horse. The sky's turn had told him everything. She needed him. Instinct screamed louder than reason. He rode into the storm. But it swallowed him. Visibility vanished. His horse slipped on a drift and fell, flinging him into a frozen creek. Ice stole the air from his lungs. Pain lanced his shoulder. He lay there a long moment, snow settling on his lashes. "She needs me," he groaned, dragging himself from the water. The horse was gone. So he walked, through waist-high snow and wind that screamed, one step at a time. At the cabin, Eleanor fought, screaming, bleeding, her body burned and broke. She cried out for strength, for her father, for mercy. The storm rattled the walls. And then, a cry. Raw, beautiful, her baby. A boy. She sobbed, cradling him, kissing damp skin, whispering every prayer she'd ever known. But Clayton had not come back, and the storm was only getting worse. Fear clawed at her chest. What if he was lost? What if she had survived this moment, only to lose the one man who had seen her not as a burden, but as something worth loving? She rocked her son with tears falling silently. "You'll be safe," she whispered, "even if it's just me." A knock, faint. Then again, firmer. She froze. The door opened. Clayton stood there, soaked in snow, blood on his shirt, face pale with pain. "Clayton!" she gasped. He stumbled inside, dropped to his knees near the fire. Steam rose from his coat, his breath came shallow. And then he saw the baby. Their eyes met. No words. He reached out, hand trembling, brushing the tiny fist at her chest. "Looks like you've already built a family, Miss Sullivan," he murmured. "Mind if I join?" Her throat closed. She could have said no, should have, maybe, but instead she shifted the baby into his arms. "Only if you're sure," she whispered. "I've never been more sure." Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, a new kind of warmth took hold. A home, a promise. A beginning neither of them had dared to dream. And this time, Eleanor knew she was not alone anymore. The first sign of spring was not flowers or melting snow, but the soft give of the earth under Eleanor's boots. Mud welcomed her steps, birds began to sing again, and the scent of pine warmed in the sunlight. Inside the cabin, the fire still crackled, but warmth also came from laughter of two people who had once known only silence. Eleanor stepped outside with a bucket in hand, her newborn son cradled against her chest in a linen sling. Clayton knelt nearby, driving the first post for what would soon be the new kitchen. "This soil's thawed early," he called, glancing up with a grin. She smiled back. "Or maybe it knows we've got work to do." He stood, dusting off his hands. "Either way, we need more room, especially for that growing boy." They had named him Thomas. No grand declarations, just something steady and true. That afternoon, Eleanor sat at the table, signing a letter to a Boston law office, her official request for divorce from Charles Whitmore. Her hand trembled slightly as she sealed it. Clayton entered then, sawdust on his sleeves and sun in his smile. "You did it?" She nodded. Last piece of the past, sealed and sent. He kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." They did not celebrate with rings or a preacher, just a supper with the Kowalskis and a few neighbors. Eleanor made stew. Clayton hung lanterns. When the sky turned lavender, he stood and took her hand. "She is the strongest woman I've ever known," he said. "I thought I was coming here to help her, but she saved me." Eleanor smiled softly. "No rings, but plenty of roots." The guests toasted with tin cups. No one asked for documents. Out here, love was proven in firewood, not signatures. A week later, Eleanor stepped outside to see Clayton finishing the new kitchen door. She had asked what he was working on, but he only said to wait. Now, in the late light, she saw it. A horseshoe, shaped and smoothed, bolted as the handle. "Found it bent near the pasture," he said. "Thought it was scrap, but turns out it just needed shaping." She traced it with her fingers. "Like some people." He nodded. "Broken things can still carry weight, if they're strong enough." The wildflowers bloomed. Thomas grew. And one golden evening, Eleanor sat at her writing desk with a piece of her father's old blue stationery. She wrote, "Dear Pa, you said once that a home was not a place, but a feeling. I did not believe you then, but now I do. I built a cabin, hauled wood, shaped the roof, fought storms. I did it for me and my boy, but it took a stubborn cowboy with dusk in his eyes and a heart like yours to make it feel like home. We are not alone anymore. Love, your Eleanor." She folded the letter and placed it in her father's old tin nail box. Outside, Thomas laughed, his first real laugh. Clayton, fixing a fence post, looked up. Eleanor walked toward him, baby in arms, heart full. The wind carried the scent of pine and promise. Spring had come, and with it, everything she had never dared to dream. If you made it to the end of this story, if your heart clenched when Eleanor stood alone in the storm, if you saw a piece of yourself in Clayton's quiet vow, "I won't lose you too," then you already understand. Love in the Wild West was never given. It was built. From pine beams and calloused hands, from sleepless nights and silent prayers, from scars no one spoke of, unless someone stayed long enough to listen. If Eleanor and Clayton's journey moved you,